But Lars, if you wouldn't mind by starting off telling us a little bit about the inspiration for this book, how you came to this novel. You know, your book Norwegian Wood was a practical guide, and so this was you have one book in between Norwegian Wood and The Bell in the Lake. But if you wouldn't mind kind of telling us a little bit about your story to start us off this afternoon, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a long story. I'll try to make it quite short. Basically, I'd written a novel after Norwegian Wood, and I was stumbling a bit when I was wondering what to write next. Then I had a friend visiting from Alaska. He's a writer, very fine writer. His name is David Van. I deeply recommend him. We were driving around in my hometown, which is near Ringebu and Fåvang in Gudbrandsdalen, and I noticed that when we were traveling around, I started talking about my hometown in a different way than I had earlier. I took him to all the places where I'd visited when I grew up, especially the river where we were fishing. We passed the church and we drove up to the mountains, and I realized that I have a story about nearly every place here in my hometown. So would it be possible to write a novel about a place just as much as people? What sort of, say, format and what sort of language should a book like that have? And then I quickly realized that it had to span more than one generation, and the ideal format for it would be 3 generations. But at that stage, it was very unclear to me how, say, what the basic plot line should be, because you cannot write a story just about a place where nothing strong, suspenseful, and emotional happens. And what can be strong and emotional and suspenseful for 3 generations? that was the main question that I asked myself. But I simply started writing and made a small story where I lined up the places that are basically from my hometown, but they are a bit in disguise. You will see when you read the novel that it's crammed with local place names and family names, but it's all a made-up place. The geography and all the farms are made up, but I like to use actual names from home. I'll tell more about that later, because my own family name is there too. But basically, that was the beginning of it. But it wasn't until I rediscovered the old legend about the sister bells, and also about the twins, that the writing really picked up pace.
So could I ask, how did you discover both of those legends, or how did you come to find those legends again? Or could you tell us a little bit about those legends also?
Yeah, sure. The legend, especially about the sister bells, is probably from around the year 1730. And it has been told for several generations in almost the same form that, well, not the form that I use in my novel, but in mostly the same structure. It has changed and it has evolved, but the structure of it is quite interesting, because there are in Scandinavia a great number of legends about church bells, and especially church bells that disappear. And the reason for that is because of the wars in Europe. Because whenever there was a war, they would the enemy would steal the church bells, because they would melt them and use them as cannons and weapons. So it was quite common when war was approaching that people took down the church bells and hid them. And water is, of course, the best place to hide them. But the very special thing about this legend is the element of the conjoined twins, and say the law that says that just like the sisters should not be separated, neither should the church bells. But this story has been told well since I think 1730 in my hometown Ringebu. But the other part of the story of the legend, that's a different one about the conjoined twins, and that is even much more of a mystery to us where it actually comes from, because we have no evidence at all that two sisters like that has ever lived. But there are a lot of legends and also a lot of written stories from also 1730 to 1750 about two sisters who were conjoined and who were very able to or very good in their craft in weaving. But that part of the story is not from Ringebu, it's from further up in Gudbrandsdal, from Dovre. But it tells in great detail about two sisters who were masters of the weaving craft, and who prayed to God that they should die on the same day. And they gave a tapestry to the church to thank God that that would in the end happen. So. But these are stories that you will find in old books of local history, but just as small pieces. So the key question for me was how to use this as backbone for a big epic fiction work, and that is when I realized that I had to make a family story and to build some sort of connection to this immortal elements that church bells and stave churches are. So basically that was the beginning of it, and I must say I didn't know at all what I started on, because it's been a hideous amount of work and it still is.
I like the adjective, a hideous amount of work.
Yeah. Don't try it at home, folks.
Yeah. Not to be tried lightly. Oh, it's fascinating. I mean, Lars, to hear you talk kind of about the integration, right, of folklore, but also into situating it within place, right, and making it very place-based. But as you're talking about the hideous amount of work, can you tell us a little bit about the research process? And you talk a little bit about it in your author's note at the end of the book, but what, besides kind of local folklore and some local histories, what other types of sources or discussions did you have with people to kind of give a little bit of framework to what you wrote?
Well, first of all, I visited several churches, and to get the both basic but also the intimate knowledge on certain details of their construction. And I also researched quite a lot on the old connections between Germany and Norway in the around well, especially from 1800 until 1910. And to do it involves a fair bit of reading, but also to travel to a place and sort of leave the current world out and try to imagine what life would be at that actual place. And especially for the parts that covers the farm work in Norway. where some of the practices were they were positively medieval, I say. Some of the work were done with the same methods that they used even 400 years earlier. And also another key for me to understand life at the time was the absence of light. That was extremely important, because I discovered that the whole mindset changes when you don't have any light around you. And the darkness and the secret that darkness hides, that puzzles your brain in strange ways. So it was quite easy to achieve it, because we have an old cabin in near the old summer farms in the district that I work, that I write about. So it was simply a matter of spending a lot of time outside in the evenings, in the darkness, and being up very early in the morning and very late at night to simply see in what directions does my mind wander when I cannot properly see what's around me. And I think that was a path into the system of superstition and beliefs that I also try to describe in the book. That was actually the darkness, the absence of light. That was the key into the interest of the supernatural, because at least my mind would flourish with ideas on what is hiding behind those trees, and what's going on there that I cannot see.
Oh, that's fascinating. So this is going to lead, this is one of the questions, we're getting some questions into the panel, and we're going to integrate those in our conversation here. But one curiosity I have about the book is you start with you start with a quote from Heart of Darkness, from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. And the quote in the inside, right before the story starts, is, and this also, said Marlowe suddenly, has been one of the darkest places of the earth. And I have to admit, my first time reading Heart of Darkness, I was a 16-year-old in world literature class. So I don't think I understood the complexities of colonization or of any much world history, but we tried. And so I was just, as I was reading the book, I was fascinated about why you picked that as kind of the starting point, or the frame. And so does it have to do with this kind of exploration of darkness that you undertook in also researching for this book?
It is, well, bits of it is, yes, but also it's it's mostly towards the Norwegian mind, because we like so much to look at ourselves as a very developed society with the oil, the good insulated houses, the new cars, our computers, everything. But just 3 generations ago, we were one of the poorest countries in Europe. And both, I think it's mostly a hint to the mindset that we had in those days. And to me, darkness isn't just a primitive thing. It's also a hint to the paths of the brain and our belief system that we cannot properly understand. So it's also a way of embracing the things that we cannot fully comprehend. But mostly, I'd say it was a hint to between old and modern day Norway. Yeah.
Interesting, fascinating. That's fascinating. So there's one of our participants, a couple of our participants actually tonight have asked, or this afternoon have raised a question about the historical accuracy of if the Germans actually came and moved churches from Norway to Germany. And then also, is there a Stav church that is that has inspired this movement? And is the Stav church that's now located in it, and my Polish is not very good, in Karpacz, Poland, is that the Stav church that is the inspiration for the story? So kind of a two-part question there.
Yeah. It's true that the one church was moved from Norway to Germany at that time. It's now in today's Poland, and that happened in 1840s. And the description of that is well, it's almost completely accurate. So that really happened, and it's the story of that is really it's full of surprises and troubles, that they went to great troubles to make it work. But in the end, the church was rebuilt there. So it was to me, it was the discovery of that story, of that true story, that inspired me. Yes, but there is no. That was the only church that was moved to Germany. So from there on, fiction has the driver's seat. But it was simply a way of well, making it believable, and because it looks like such a immense task to move a whole church to another country, but they actually did it. And in just 4 years ago, some enthusiasts actually moved a stave church from the US to Norway. And it was not it is built like a stave church, but it's not been, what you call it, I don't know the exact word, but it's not a church. They have to call it a building, because it's not been, they do something with a Christian, vigsling.
Yeah. So it's a dedicated, like blessing or dedication of, yes, yeah.
But those things happened, and to me, it wasn't just a consecrated. Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah.
But to me, it wasn't just the actual movement and the act of rebuilding a structure. It was the whole scene of moving something so precious and something that old from a small village, and taking away something that had been there for 700 years. And all the emotions and all the mental impact that such a thing has on people, and that at that stage, it was when I started to fully appreciate the power of the main character of Astrid Häckne, who on one hand wants to preserve the old, but also embrace the new, and the conflict that rises in her. So to me, the mighty event of tearing down a stave church was, well, it was such a mighty thing that it also led to my deeper understanding of her as a character. Yeah.
Interesting. You describe so beautifully the landscape in the book, and so I almost read the book as the landscape as a character in a way. Just the area, the nature emotes so much. And so one of the parts that I really enjoyed was talking about just the significance of these church buildings too on the landscape, and how they were markers and kind of anchors within communities. And you talk a lot about the kind of the liminality, so the transitional nature, especially for this church, about moving, and the kind of progress that goes along with this. And Astrid, now to hear you talk about this, hearing how kind of Astrid's dreams about going and moving and the train, there's some great scenes about her talking about the listening for the the railway being built, or those types of kind of the markers of progress. How much history or how much research did you need to do into kind of the religious landscape of Norway at the time for this text?
Oh, that's quite a bit, yes. And I needed help from a good friend of mine who's a preacher. And he helped me in a great number of ways. And one thing was to fully learn the power that the preacher had, because he was in several places. He was the only representative of civilization, and also it was important for me to learn how they actually worked and how much responsibility they had. There is a part of the book where they actually pay money for those who shoot wolves and bears, and that seems like an exaggeration, but it's actually true. So I did a lot of research, mostly on a practical level, because then it's easier for me to move into the character and to sort of understand what a person, Kai Schweigård, would be, because he's absolutely a product of the new modern Norway. It's also it's possible to make him a bit of a funny character, because he doesn't understand. He has all this education, but he doesn't understand the codes of the local society. But in the research, I did a lot of when I visited churches, I was also allowed to at one occasion to wear some of the old clothes that the preacher used, and to step into it was closed then, but to dress myself as a preacher and to go up to the prekestolen, the chair, and sort of try to imagine what feeling does this give me? How does my personality change when I wear this formal dress? And what would it be like if I was the head figure of a Christian society? So I do all these things as research to play with my brain and to sort of build make up the character. And then when I've written it in the first and second draft, I always start rewriting it, and I always find a deeper level of understanding then. And then it's not like I have researched it or invented it. It's like I'm retelling a story to someone who actually lived. Yeah. So that's my own personal path into it. Yeah.
That's fascinating. We've got a question a little bit about some of the religious landscape and kind of the blending, right, of folklore and mythology. And one of our participants, the question reads as such. She says, "I'm fascinated by the acceptance and tolerance of folklore and mythology within the churches. The church's attitude in this book was dramatically different to kind of the integration of this than, for example, a book called The Mercies, which is set around 1620, which was focused on kind of the witch hunts in the northern part of Norway. Do you have any kind of, in your research, how did Christian attitudes towards the mythology differ in parts of Norway, but in kind of this time period? Or were there differences, or was this just kind of was the integration of these two, of the Christian tradition and the mythological traditions, was it just kind of together? Did it come together?
Well, it had several stages that all of them are very interesting. The very, very earliest stages, when Norway came out of the Viking Age with Olav the Sacred and became a Christian country. The Catholic Church allowed Norway to build certain elements of the old Norse beliefs with the Odin and Thor into the churches, and you will also see that a lot in the decorum and the woodcraft of the old churches. A lot of this was destroyed during Reformation times in 1530s, but that was the first thing that is quite surprising. They actually allowed a not a direct transition, but a more modest transition between the old and the new beliefs. So there are stave churches in Norway where there are figures of Odin and Thor on each side of the Christian cross, simply to protect Jesus. And these can be seen today. They are at museum. And another fascinating thing they did was that they made small gold coins of Norse gods under each pillar of the stave church. This have been found when they have been rebuilding churches, and one can ask oneself, was it a way that the new gods should suppress the old, or was it the old gods that should hold and carry the new beliefs? You can interpret it both ways, but it was a very common practice. They found several hundred of these gold coins in the places where there were stave churches. And then if we move from there until what I would really call the Dark Ages, which is at the end of 1500 and until 1680 or around there. That was the period of the witch hunts and a period of very, very dark times in Norway, with extremely bad social conditions, and also a time where well, not only poverty, but a period of great suspicion between people. I write about it in the third volume of the book, so I will come back to it there. But that was a time when the strict rules of Christianity had a very firm grip on people, and nothing outside the Christian set of beliefs was considered well, you wouldn't get away with any other belief than, say, the pure form of Christianity. But still, another mindset and another set of beliefs existed, and that was the connection to nature, which is described in this book as something that is very much alive, and that is the beliefs that give us the figures out in the woods, like Huldra, Nøkken, the troll, and the Nisse, and all these figures. And when you look at it from today's perspective, it may look like something that's very naive and something that you would scare children about or with, but it is in fact a quite advanced set of rules to understand the dangers of nature and also the dangers of the seasons. On one hand, you used it to scare children away from all the places that were dangerous. You would invent or put a scary creature in all the places that were dangerous, like the wells and the waters and especially the naked mountains, And that was simply a way of keeping children safe, so they wouldn't go where it was dangerous. But it was also a way of interpreting the way animals behave in nature, because that was extremely important to understand how animals would behave in certain conditions. And one figure that always reappears there is what we call the underjordiske, the underground creatures. And I still remember my grandparents talking about the underjordiske, because they would lead the cows astray and do all sort of tricks to, especially to cows. But when we look at it now, it is some of it is much more advanced than at first sight. And when they describe the will of these supernatural beings, it may actually translate into a quite advanced set of how animals react to geographical positions, how they want to go east or north under certain conditions, and how they have a certain pattern of movement inside the mountains. And the old people, they would say that it was the underground people that led them there, but it is a natural compass in animals that we today doesn't fully understand. We just accept it, but they needed a name for everything. So we need to look at it with say, a broader perspective to understand it. They were just as intelligent as us, but they just needed, or they just put words on everything that they couldn't fully explain.
Oh, it's fascinating. That is just absolutely fascinating. And the interplay, right? It gets to the interplay, right, between both the natural world, the supernatural world, and then humans, and how those relationships are negotiated. And it's such a rich setting, right? I find that, like, it's such a rich setting for putting these characters in the midst. And so I think there are a lot of questions coming in about the characters. If we kind of, I think we'll maybe save Astrid for the end here a little bit. But Andrew and I were realizing we didn't give a little spoiler alert here at the beginning that we are going to talk about the book a little bit as if everybody's read it. So if you haven't quite finished the book, we apologize, but we're going to kind of treat this as a full encompassing, because I know there are questions about the end as well. And excitement about book 2, that we've got some things before to talk about, possibly just to tie those things together. But we've gotten a couple questions in the chat. Well, one of them is Clara Mytting a relative?
No, she's not. But as I mentioned, I used actual family names on several people there, and I simply needed to use my own name on the strangest one of them all, simply because I would get beaten up at the next party when I come home. But it was deliberate, because it adds a element. It adds just that element. Is she real? Has she lived? Is she an extension of my own mind? And and I wanted to play that little puzzle with the reader's mind. Who is she actually? And but she hasn't lived. She is the background of that story, when she freezes to death in the church, is based on a story my grandma told me from Vingrom. It's a church south of Lillehammer, where she attended a sermon in, I think it was 1912, and it was so awfully cold, and the preacher never managed to finish, and they froze almost. They were stuck to the seats, and everyone was shivering, and the preacher kept talking. And every time we drove past that church, grandma would retell that story. And now I'm retelling it to my children every time we pass that church. But so it was both a homage to grandma, but also to include that piece of mystery. And I can, since this is a work where we touch the magical and the superstitions, I can also tell you that she's not completely gone. she is. Well, I cannot spoil it really, but something more than the church came to. Something more than just the church came to Dresden.
Yeah.
So
we are looking forward to that. We will maybe Bokprat part 2 series, or Bokprat, but I don't, you know much more than we do. So cool. So we have one question here kind of about the German connection and our German architect here. So Kirsten is sharing with us that she says, my family came from Singsos, and that parish tore down their old Stav church in 1884 after building a new one 5 kilometers away and on the other side of the river. Mm-hmm. She said, I would imagine this story could have happened there as well. My great-grandfather would have been 11 years old in 1880 and could have been one of Astrid's younger brothers. It was fascinating to read about the Norway my great-grandfather grew up in and left. I've also seen an online drawing of an old Stav church in Singsos by Gerhard Schöning. I am thinking that Gerhard in your book is partly inspired by him. Is that possibly true, or is there an inspiration for the Gerhard?
It may have been, but I had actually forgotten Schöning when I wrote it. So after finishing the book, I looked back into some old research material, and I discovered that the name was almost the same. So it wasn't intentional, actually. The name Schöning came from a German rifle mechanism called Mannlicher Schönauer, which will also play a part in book 2 in the hunting rifle. It's a small code that no one will see, but no, it wasn't connected to that. But Mr. Herr Schöning was a very early scientist and or historian, and he was actually one of the first to describe the legend of the Heckne sisters from Dovre. So I had probably read him, but I had forgotten his name when I wrote it. So these things happen.
Well, maybe a magic moment of the supernatural living inside your conscience, or something along those lines. Oh, fascinating. This book is so grounded and foundational in the love triangle that also exists, and it's such a foundational piece. And the character of Astrid, when we talked a little bit on Wednesday in preparation for this event, you mentioned the power of writing her character. And there's a question about the role of women in Norwegian society at this time. And it seems in a way that she is so bound by so many expectations and patriarchal society that places expectations upon her, but yet she figures out a way to make her voice heard and to make her opinions known. So there's one question about just, what was the status of women, and did you mirror Astrid's kind of disposition off of kind of the historical position of women, or were there other factors that inspired you in the creation of this incredible character?
Yeah, she on one hand, she's the pure fictional character that somehow comes out of the surroundings and say of the fiction, and that's those elements of her could have been in any book really. But when I looked at the time period of 1880 and the boundaries of women there, certain limits to her life quickly interested me. And I think she was, at that moment, there was already the beginning of a movement of a women's liberation in Norway. And that had just started, but mostly in the cities. So she would have struggled quite precisely, I think, against the forces of her father and the expectations of getting married on to a farm of the similar size as the Heckne farm, and also to the boundaries of the preacher, who is a more powerful man than we can, I think we can fully understand from today, because it would not be possible for her to marry him within accepted social limits at that time. And that also puzzled me really. Why is that so, when there is someone as clever and someone who is such a good partner to him and who would bring out the very best of Kai Schweigård? Why does this have to collapse? And what are the actual limits that keep them away from each other? And these things puzzled me. And I think if the actual if it had been a true possibility without that awfully big fight of them falling in love with each other, and if that would be more accepted, I think the whole book would turn out differently. But there is her fight against the rules of society. They have to go through Kai Schweigård, who she's also fascinated about. So that's the beginning of the love and hate aspect of the relationship, which also goes through the facets of the old and the new, since he is quite blindly obsessed with the new, bringing the new conditions to society. And there were a lot of people like Kai Schweigård who did mighty good things to the society, but they were also, some of them were completely blind for the traditions that ruled at the time.
Yeah. So the ending of this, and I guess Astrid's ending, it was, as I read it, I was sad, and I was, there was a lot of emotion in the last few pages of this book, and the last chapters, and I think kind of how this lays the future, and we'll talk about that in a few. But how was it? Did you have the ending in mind when you sat down to write the first book, or did this character and the evolution of the relationships as you wrote, did that evolve?
No, I really had hoped that I should make it simpler and easier on everyone. And I must say that as a writer, it's the most mentally challenging thing that I've ever done. I woke up several times. I'm not joking. I woke up several times. I phoned my editor and said, I want to change it. I want to do it differently and be gentler. But then I realized that, to be completely honest to the conditions of women at the time, I had to do it that way. And also because the internal law of the separation of the church bells and the laws of the legend partly dictated it. And obviously that's not a good explanation, but I think what made it really was the idea of being honest to the struggle of women at the time. And it's completely true what's in the book about the what's it called, Caesarean cut?
Yeah.
That was invented by a German doctor with his practice from Norway. And that came just 2 years later, and that made such a fundamental change to how complicated births would happen. But I must say that when it left such a void in me, and that when I started to write volume 2, all my plans were changed simply because I had to justify. And you know, on one hand, I retell retell things that I've made up, but somehow I also feel a need to justify what the choices I've made, and that sparked a very new set of creativity in the writing process. And the odd thing is, when you read volume 2, that sheds so much more light on volume 1 than I had expected. We follow Astrid's 2 sons for a time span of nearly 20 years. But also, when you come to volume 3, you will also see that the immense power of the sad ending of volume 1 will have immense impact on volume 3. So she does great things, even if she had that tragic fate. And there's one song that came to mind, and it's from Bruce Springsteen. It's from a place very different than Bhutan, and another very different place. It's from the song called Atlantic City, and it says, "Everything dies, baby, that's a fact. But maybe everything that dies someday comes back." So it's a way of hinting that even if someone's gone, their will and their power and their soul might still be with us somehow. Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing. That's absolutely beautiful and so interesting, and that makes us so excited for volumes 2 and 3 to come out. There is so much wrapped up in that power of Astrid and how the connection that she brings throughout this text. We've got a few other questions that are kind of popping in, and so I just want to make sure we get to as many of those as we can as we go through. It is said, there's a quick question here about the power of brass and that it has a unique property. I think that it is marked on page 106 in one of the editions that we have here in English. And the question is it true that brass has this unique property that it prevents disease that's stated by Schonar in the text?
Yeah, it is. I'm not sure how much, but they use brass extensively in hospitals. And I spoke to a British. The way I discovered it was from a British. He was metallurg, is that called? A scientist in the properties of metal, and he said that there is a small electric charge that will, when human skin touches brass, that will discharge and kill a lot of bacteria. So they have used it on several surfaces that are critical to cleanliness. So that's true. And and also I see someone mentioning silver here. That's exactly the same, and that is probably why they gave it such magical beliefs and powers in Norway. But one thing that may come as a surprise is that when they discovered what could the key to the Caesarean cut, I'm not sure if I say it correctly, but that was to use silver thread as a thread.
Stitch.
Because that no bacteria could attach to it. So that was the key finding that that they discovered in 1882. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's fascinating. That's fascinating. Well, we're always interested in antibacterial things in this time, in this day and age. Yeah, yeah, you know, in this day and age, we're always curious. So that's fascinating. And the power of those earthly elements. Oh, very, very cool. We also have a few questions about the translation work and the translation of this text from Norwegian to English. And one question was, there's døla horses are mentioned, and in the text, are those Norwegian fjord horses?
No, they're a different breed. They are bigger. The fjording is extraordinarily good at slippery surfaces. It's an expert on bare stone because they used it near the coast. But the døla hest is bigger, but it was used in hauling timber especially, but also for plowing, and it's a bit larger. It's about a stouter than the fjording, so they have different purposes. Yeah. And we in volume 3 you will meet a beautiful døla horse. Varten. They were actually so big that during the war the Germans they took the døla hest from the farms and sent them on trains to the Eastern Front because they could haul cannons through the snow. So that was utterly tragic part of the history. Oh. So we have a story from my farm at home when the Germans came and they took the big black horse that had been on the farm for a long, I think it was 20 years old. And they took him down to Fåvang, and he was to be sent off on the train the next day, together with a lot of other horses. But then he managed somehow to get the rope undone, and he walked up to Mytting, the farm of my grandfather, and he walked up there during the night, and the Germans accepted it. So they never came for him, and he survived the war and was not sent to the Eastern Front.
Oh, my.
So, on a farm, you get so many of these small, fantastic images from life through so many centuries that I'm so grateful of well, having been told. And my mother has been a very important source for these old stories from the 1930s and 40s and 50s. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah. So the names come up, and we talked a little bit about this on Wednesday as well. One of my family names, there's special connection here, Lars, because this is the area of which a large branch of my family comes from, and there's a connection there. But one of our participants was curious about the names that have C's and W's in them, because that's not typically they're not two common letters that you see in Norwegian names. My mom's maiden name actually starts with a W, and they came from right around Ringebu, and we still don't understand totally where that name comes from. But we have Schweigard and Kolmeier here. Can you talk about the choice for those names, or is there any significance that in how you chose those names? Or that
I'm very glad you ask, because they are part of the Danish and German name traditions, and these were families that came from Germany, as Schweigard and also well, Schweigard came from Germany and Denmark, where the W was common, and they had a lot of the positions of the government in the old times. So if someone was an officer, a policeman, or a bishop, or someone in charge of what we call the embedsverk, which is the oldest form of government, you would very often see them with names like that. And it was also in fashion if you had studied abroad, to change your name a bit, to make it look a bit more foreign. So you would add a C or a W to make it look like you came from one of the old families. And Schweigård is I was a bit, I took a bit of a chance there, because that's the actual name of a Norwegian politician who made a great deal of changes to society. And he was one of those who changed the school system, and also he did a lot of work for the Norwegian Railroad. So he was a very important character. And in the book I say that he is his uncle, but that's a long shot. But it's somehow I get to I get the taste of the old, of the old Danish German families who's in charge there, and that gives him a bit of distance, but also a bit of the inherent power that that these people had. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating, and that history is so deep and so rich, and the ruling classes, right? The tension between the urban and the rural populations as well. And another way that gets played out a little bit is the translation of Astrid's dialect.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so one of the questions we have in right now is that our participant is interested in the English translation of the local dialect. And how did you work with the translator to come up with some English phrases that would come across as to kind of portray Astrid's kind of character, and to kind of create also that distance, right, between her and Kai in how their language usage?
Yeah. It was a very, very great effort by the translator Deborah Dawkins, and we had hours and hours on Skype calls to try to create a language that would some reflect the rural dialect. But the really, really tricky part there is that if you play that wrong, you will make people look a bit simple or foolish, or someone with a limited set of language skills. But the Norwegian dialect is the opposite. It's actually way richer, because you have all the words from the common dictionary. There are someone that doesn't sing right in dialect that we have to leave out, but you have such a extraordinary amount of very specialized words for all, not for technical parts, but for nature and for mood, and especially for joking with people and to characterize people when they are drunk, when they are ill, if they have some habits. All of that is extraordinary, made with extraordinary precision, and there's an extreme richness in that. And I think one of the jobs for Deborah was to create a certain melody of her dialect, because obviously she couldn't resemble anything of the Norwegian, but what she landed on was to create a sort of melody that she would use in all the dialect. Yeah. And the Norwegian original is not proper dialect either, because that would make it would impose a great deal of limits to the what I could make them express if I should write it in full dialect. So it is written in Norwegian standard form, but with certain words changed to dialect. And then I also included deliberately some really, really special and crazy words that that's part of the dialect. And I also developed some words myself. So some of the words like the name for Judgment Day, which I believe is called the Night of the Scourge, is called Skråpånatta, and that's my own invention. That's my own word. and also the material inside the church bells that has healing properties. You will again find it in volume 2. That is called Helgenskurv, which is a word that I made up. So the book, the Norwegian book, plays a bit more about it, but not much really. There are those words, but in the audiobook, which I read myself, I read it in full dialect. So I read it in a dialect that was from home in middle of Gudbrandsdalen. Yeah. And the dialect, it has changed a bit, but it's the dialect that I learned and I grew up with in the 1970s. So Norwegian audiobook listeners, they struggle a bit. They need about 10 to 15 minutes to adapt to it, but it adds a certain depth to the book that people like.
That's fascinating. That was actually, you hopped into the Q&A. There was actually a question raised about, is there an audio version of the book available? So this is fabulous, and a fabulous jumping off point for us. Here, I think we'll have to work on that. I need to work on my dialect. I snakker standard bokmål. So I speak completely standardized Norwegian. So I need to work on my dialect. So I think that will be a listen for the days ahead. We have another question about the word love. And love, especially in Norwegian. And one of the participants today is asking, is it true that the word love did not appear in some dialects, or still doesn't? Or how do the expressions of love play out in language politics or in language expression? Yeah,
it's true that it's a very, very difficult word in our dialect. And it's part of it, or most of it, is because of the mood and the general way that we use language on, because it's a word that belongs to books and the written sphere, while in such an intimate situation that you should express love to someone, it simply is difficult to it's a difficult situation for people that's not very vocal to start off with. But there are certain words that don't sing right on the dialect, and it's a problem, of course, because if we were more vocal, we would have much more love affairs and have a better life. But I think the key of it is that that you should not exaggerate your own feelings. No, you will never find someone who from our district who says that, well, I'm very good at this. They will not say it because it's not part of the culture. They would say it in more the opposite of exaggeration. They would say that, well, I might make it. I'll see what I can do, and then you know that's an expert in things. So it's this sort of inverted way of using the adjectives that makes it. So, but it's. My wife she's from Oslo, and she wasn't happy at all that I couldn't say that I love her. It just said, well, I like you, and that's not enough. And she required something much more profound than that. So people say it, perhaps. I had a friend who said it in a wedding. I love you, they said. And but he made a point of it, that it was so hard for us to say it, but here we are getting married, so I will declare my love to you. But it's also part of the melody of the word that's hard. I think I describe it as good as I can in the book, that when you say it, the word just want to go back down to your lungs again.
yeah, it's a complicated, it's fascinating. It's
and
fascinating.
but it's also, it's not, I'm not very happy with it. We should have a word for affection, really, that could embrace those emotions. So, and that part is cultural, really. It's a bit of emotional suppression that we suffer from. So I have to accept that. I'm not entirely happy that we cannot say it.
We talk about this word, especially in our classes at Luther College, when we talk about just verbs and all of those things, because, you know, in the United States, we tend to love everything. We love everything with effervescent, much power. And we have to say to our students, you can't just go to Norway and just love everything. It will not, there will be a culture clash there.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, you're right. Well, we are used to it in the. I think if we are speaking English, we could say, "I love this, I love this," and that would be easier. But in Norwegian, oh, we struggle.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, Lars, our time is quickly wrapping up, but there are many questions that are being posed about volumes 2 and volumes 3,
Yep.
both about their release. There are a couple of questions about what happens with the weaving, and does that come back in volumes 2 or 3, and any kind of hints you can give us for the next volume.
Yeah. Volume 2 will be called The Reindeer Hunters, and it is translated now in English, and sadly, it will be published in the UK before it comes to US. That's a pity. But since I know what's happening, I can tell you it starts in 1903, 22 years after the end of Volume 1, and Norway is even more in transition at the time. That's the time when we get electric light, trains, better post connections, and telephone. So we are on the brink of the new and modern Norway at the time. And one very, very important character there is Kai Sveigård, who's still struggling with what he did in 1880, and that has changed him profoundly. So he's a much more mature and very, very different man than when we meet him now. And he has not remarried, and he has not come over the loss of Astrid. So she's with him in nearly every day, and whatever he does, he does it to ask himself, if am I now the man that Astrid Heckne would have been able to marry? But the other characters are Astrid Heckne's sons, and as we remember, one of them were in mysterious conditions moved away from the other boy. And they will, I can say, they will of course meet, but under conditions that they don't understand themselves. And Hans he is a character full of opposition to the existing society, because he hasn't been well treated by his family. So he is on the lower end of the social scale now, and he won't accept much help from Kai Sveigård because he has discovered what happened. So it's a story of 3 men who is working their way through a Norway that goes under very large changes, and it's a story of friendship and hate between and eventually friendship again. And it's the key questions here are well, one on the family level, and the other one are on the level of the say of the big elements of the story, the church bells, and their powers, and of course the tapestry, the Hekne weave, which many readers will be led to believe is in the coffin that they moved in 1880. And Kai Schweigård asks himself also if it may be there. So, and I think no reader can resist a good scene where they open a grave. So I gave you that as well. And well, volume 3 will unfold, but the key thing about volume 3 is how much it interconnects with volume 1. But it's too early to say. It's not out in Norway yet, and I still have 1 more year of writing. So, but that will conclude the whole story.
Oh, Lars, we so look forward. We so look forward. Andrew and I were scheming about how we could use connections in the UK to get an early copy of it, of book 2 in English, before we started. And
it's completely legal, so get hold of it.
But we will not do anything illegal. We promise. No, promise.
What's wrong? If you can get hold of it, please do.
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, Lars, we cannot thank you. Vi sier hjertelig takk for an incredibly powerful 75 minutes. And there's so much more we could talk about in regards to this book. I want to close. There's one comment in the questions in the Q&A here from a participant today who says, "Thank you so much for writing this book. I was filled with emotion thinking of my grandparents and their life in Norway and the challenges they faced. I often wonder how they would face today's challenges, and I remember them and their strength." And I think absolutely, we didn't even get to touch on the fact of, for an audience for whom I'm guessing many have connections to family members who left Norway at this time, of how this book kind of interplays and engages a global dialogue about just life and the conditions of life, of loving, of living. And we are so very thankful for your reflections and for joining us here today. So hopefully when the Reindeer Hunters is out in the United States, we might be able to find another time if you'd be willing to come back and join us again.
Thank you. I'm so grateful myself to you. And I have several relatives in North America, especially in Canada, in Saskatchewan, and I feel a very, very strong connection because that they are, say, a part of my family from my grandfather's time. So it's sort of a reconnection back to the time when he emigrated in 1912. Every time I come back to see someone. So all Norwegian Americans remind me of that beautiful connection there. So I'm very grateful too. Thank you.